Salutations Rangers, General Bradley 101 back again with some more history. Yes indeed, ladies and gentlemen, after a long hiatus, a long absence, welcome back to
History Hammer.
Yes indeed, ladies and gentlemen, this awesome, amazing, wonderful series has returned. All hail the long-lost prodigal son. And to celebrate coming back, we're doing something a little different than what we normally do. For those of you who don't know, on History Hammer, we normally take a unit, faction, or something from 40k and see about his historical counterparts. But we're doing something different. Because for those of you who may or may not know, the Roman Empire is heavily inspired the Imperium of Man. If you couldn't tell, Imperium Romanum, kind of the same thing. And if you're a Rome nerd, you may know about a certain fellow by the name of Carthage. Carthage was one of, if not Rome's greatest obstacle to hegemony of the Mediterranean. And many stipulate, what would happen if Carthage had won the Punic Wars, rather than lost them? The world would be very different as it is today. So for something like the Imperium, which is so heavily inspired of Rome, it's kind of a damn shame that Carthage, one of the most important players of Rome, is not in 40k. But ladies and gentlemen, we are going to fix this wrong today. We're going to write it, make it tight, and all that lovely jubbly goodness. Because today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be making Carthage in Warhammer 40k. So ladies and gentlemen, strap on in, buckle up, and let's get crack-a-lackin' on with today's video, by first finding out what exactly is Carthage. So, how exactly are we going to do this? I have done my research into Carthage and I've managed to condense it into 5 main categories. That being the foundation, the economy, the government, the military, and the culture. We're going to be going over each and every one of these 5 points, seeing what are the core elements of each individual categories. From there, we're going to take these individual points and then translate them into 40k. From there, we're going to take these points and we're going to use that to build up our lore. But before we get into all that, let's just give a little overview of what exactly was Carthage. Carthage was a Mediterranean power of its day and age. It was originally formed of a Phoenician colony, but with the fall of the Phoenicians, it would eventually go on to become the main trading power of the Mediterranean. It was known for its amazing culture, fantastic goods, and its mercenary armies. It had a unique aspect to it, that being a Greco-African Persian theme to it. It was a combination of things that was incredibly unique, and damn impressive to look at, if I may say. But despite their prowess as traders, seamen, and their mighty naval capabilities, they are most famous for being the opponent of Rome. In 3 devastating wars, Rome and the Punics, as they were known in Latin, would fight for dominance over the Mediterranean, with eventually Rome proving triumphant, and Carthage being utterly destroyed, with the people and its culture being assimilated into the Rome and the actual city itself being destroyed and the land of Carthage literally being salted, i.e., they plowed the earth and they planted salt so that no one could ever grow there again. The Romans really had a hate boner for Carthage, especially Cato. Cato was a senator in Rome. Politician basically, and he was famous for ending every single speech. It doesn't matter what it could be about finances, housing, or the goddamn state of the moon. He would always end his speeches with Carthago delenda est, or Carthage must be destroyed. Like I said, hate boner. But that's the TLDR. But now let's take a look at the first of our 5 main categories, being the foundation. Carthage was initially founded as a colony of the city-state of Tyre, but more specifically it would be founded under its first ruler, the mythical Queen Dido. Now the origin of Dido in of itself is a very unique tale. Essentially, she was married to the high priest of the main god, that being Moloch. However, there were some political shenanigans, and her brother would actually end up staging a coup and killing her husband. However, Dido doesn't exactly feel like being ruled by her brother, and she decides that she's going to play a little trick on him. See, with her husband being the chief priest, he had a large treasury, so her brother sent some officials to gather said treasury. However, she then took those officials on a boat and pretended to throw the money into the ocean. Turns out it was just a bunch of rocks. From there, she would convince them to be like, hey, the money's gone now, he's going to kill you, he's also kind of a dick. So her, together with her loyal followers as well as everyone else who wasn't really a fan of the whole polygamon, that being the name of her brother, then boarded their ships and then moved from the city of Tyre to one of the African colonies. And they would land in there and they would be helped by a fellow African colony known as Utica. And there Queen Dido would then found the city of Carthago, or Carthage, meaning the new city. And all this happened around the year supposedly 814. Remember, this is a pseudo-mythological representation because the earliest sources that we have stating this come from about the 3rd century, so, keep that in mind. So, something that is interesting is that this mythical origin is also tied into the Roman mythical origin. Now, we're not exactly how true this is, because, it kind of makes a little too much sense, but Rome was initially founded by the Trojan hero known as Aeneas, and allegedly Aeneas and his people stopped in the city of Carthage, and Queen Dido was so smitten by him, she wanted him to stay there and become her consort. They spent a night together to get the supplies, however in the morning, Aeneas hit it and quit it, and then left to form Rome. Dido apparently was so upset by this that she put a curse on him and their descendants, saying that the two would always be in conflict. Again, given how everything happened with the Punic Wars, you can see how this is a little bit too convenient. But Carthage would go on and it would continue to flourish under Dido's rule. Other things that Dido was said to do was be incredibly intelligent, absolutely stunning. And it's said that she was very, very, very cunning. For example, the noble, we believe he was a king of the Libyans at the time, allowed her to settle on a plot of land. However, it was only supposed to be as large as an ox hide could cover. So the wily Queen Dido cut the oxen into such thin strips that it was able to cover enough area that it would be able to found a city. Again, very cunning, very, very, very smart. But Carthage would continue to grow and flourish as a trading colony. That would be, however, until Tyre would be conquered and incorporated into the Persian Empire proper. Tyre had been conquered and incorporated into some empires beforehand, mainly the Babylonians as well as the Neo-Assyrians. However, under the Persians, it was reformed into a satrapy proper, and actually integrated into it. Meaning that the old mother colonies and mother cities were no longer that. They were essentially cut off in all ways, shape and forms. That would leave a massive power vacuum. Carthage would then go on to establish itself as hegemon over the remaining colonies. And it was able to do this because not only did it exert soft power in the form of trade and wealth, but more importantly, unlike the other fellow sister cities, it was able to incorporate hard power in the form of the citizen soldier military, and it was said to have the greatest navy even amongst the Phoenicians themselves. The Phoenicians had always been amazing sailors, but Carthage is said to produce the greatest amongst them, meaning that Carthage was not able to talk the talk, it was able to walk the walk, and through all of this it was able to establish itself with a sizable kingdom in North Africa directly under its own control, but also create a vast empire of vassal states and allies via specific treaties. So that's essentially how the foundation works. So from here we can draw a few key points. First, it was originally a colony. Second, it exerted not only soft power but also hard power. Third, it did not rule directly. It was not a traditional empire in that sense, but rather it was more of a trade league, but with a bit more backing behind its leader. And fourth, and some would argue most importantly, it had a beautiful and cunning queen. Even till today in modern Tunisia, Dido is a very, very, very important figure in the culture and folklore. So, how are we going to translate this into 40k? Firstly, our new faction was originally going to be a colony of an imperial polity on the edge of imperial space. It was there to gather and trade in rare materials. The Imperium does this a lot. The Imperium is rather decentralized, so it makes sense that if there was a valuable trade node, be it a trade area or trade materials, an imperial polity would take it upon itself to establish trade colonies in that area. So that's what we're going to be going with. Second, it was a trading state initially, a trading colony, a trading post, but because this is 40k, it had to defend itself. Think Orc Raiders, Eldar Raiders, Xenos Pirates, regular human pirates, Chaos. It had to develop a military to defend it. A military that was particularly naval focused. It would go on to form mutual trade and defense pacts with other colonies. This would then set the groundwork for it to eventually turn into the proper empire. And finally, it would be founded by a very beautiful and cunning imperial noble. Because of course, we gotta make Dido in 40k. So that's gonna round up the foundation. And as we can see, the foundation in Carthage is very mythical, as were most great states back in history. But it makes a great deal of sense. The transition from initial trading colony and the factors that came into it means that it's quite easy for us to translate it. And all in all, the translation is relatively one-to-one and it makes pretty good sense in 40k. So not much changes we have to make here. But now, let's talk about its economy. Carthage was initially built as a trading city, and its lifeblood was the rich naval trade, which it ended up taking full control over for three main reasons. First, the old Phoenician city-states began to decline. They were conquered, as I mentioned, by several great empires, including the Neo-Assyrians, Babylonians, but it would be under the Persians that the final blow would come. As while the previous rulers had been rather decentralized and didn't really bother too much integrating the Phoenicians, the Persian Empire had the satrapy system, or the province system, and they were very, very heavily on centralizing and administrating the specific areas. In fact, this system would be so good that when Alexander conquered the Persian Empire, he'd keep it in all but name. All this meant that the heart of the old Phoenician Empire was incorporated into the Persian Empire proper, essentially removing the greatest trading power in the world. This would leave a massive power vacuum, which Persia, being a continental power, did not seek to fill. Carthage, however, would then pick up the mantle and run with it all the way to the bank. Number 2. The Phoenicians had long been the greatest sailors in the known world, and Carthage would not only inherit this, but strengthen it greatly, most importantly, both commercially and militarily. This was something that the other colonies didn't really do. Yes, they focused on defense, but Carthage not only focused on defense, it focused on offense as well, to exert physical hard power in the forms of great navy battleships. And third, the Carthaginians did not only trade raw materials, but rather, they would build up a fully industrialized, or as industrialized as one could get back in antiquity, production center, in which raw materials would be brought back to the heart of the empire, that being North Africa and of itself, and transformed into both lavish and luxurious goods. But, most importantly, everyday essentials for the common man. It's noted that the Carthaginians traded in everything, be he pauper or prince, as long as you had coin, the Carthaginians had wares. And that is truly what separated Carthage from other trading empires at the time. They didn't just focus on one aspect, they focused on every single aspect. Not to mention, they had ships that could trade all the way from the Black Sea into the open ocean. Well, I'd say open ocean, they could get through the gates of Hercules and get to the corner cities of Africa and of itself. In fact, we have records of Carthaginian sailors going as far as the Nordics and all the way to India in some cases. So they got around. Combine that with the fact that they were very entrepreneurial and generally speaking rather hard-working and very excellent at their craft. It's no wonder how Carthage became a proper trading empire. So from here, we can gather 3 main points. Number 1. Carthage took over from Tyre as it was conquered. The mother city was gone, so the colony then fulfilled the power vacuum. Number 2. It expanded navally both as a commercial but a military power. This was something that a lot of its sister cities did not do. Yes, they had militaries for defense, but they didn't really focus into a proper navy. The Carthaginian navy was known as being the shield of the empire. Again, it was kind of like a proto-version of Great Britain, circa 18th, 19th century. Incredibly deadly navy that protected the trade lanes. Third, and in my opinion the most vital, it both gathered and produced trade goods to sell to everyone. Carthage did the full 9 yards. They got the best of the best. It was made by the best of the best, and they sell to the best of the best to everyone. The best of the best of a prince and the best of a normal man, be it farm tools or jewelry, meaning that they had every single market access to every single class access. That at the time was a rather revolutionary idea. So, how are we going to translate these ideas into 40k? Firstly, our Carthage would take over after its initial polity would be conquered by the Imperium after a failed rebellion. This happens all the time. People like their money, they decide to take away the tithe, that's when the Imperium starts to care. Number 2, being on its own, it had not to only organize the trade but protect it, which resulted in a booming naval industry. Again, it builds on from what we talked about during the foundation. And third, it used advanced technology to harvest and refine rare materials into goods. The whole part of our founding for our imperial polity is that they were sent there because of the raw materials. So, not only do they have to get the raw materials, but now they have to produce it, manufacture it, and use technology to do so, which may or may not be imperial in nature. But I'm getting ahead of myself. All in all, the economy of Carthage was something that is incredibly unique and very similar to our modern day economies. The world we live in is based off trade, and to think that Carthage basically did what Great Britain and what America are doing today, it's kind of odd to think that it was about a couple thousand years apart. Or it makes perfect sense. Depends on how you like to look at it. But overall, translating it from history into 40k is pretty simple. The Imperium's economy is unique, to say the least, and it's more robust than people give it credit for. But rogue traders are specifically known for being very well versed in trading, hence their name, Rogue Trader. So having a rogue trade empire being incredibly wealthy via unrestricted trade is actually something that's quite common in 40k. Again, it makes a very seamless transition from history into 40k. But if you want to find the money, you go to the top of the pile. So let's talk about their government. The government of Carthage was initially a monarchy. Like pretty much every other major power of antiquity, the monarchy has always been the default go-to. However, Carthage soon learned that a monarchy is not really the best choice for a number of reasons. Mainly, it's RNG based. You could get a really good ruler that's a fortune builder, hale and intelligent, or you could get one who's invalid, possessed, and a lunatic. CK3 gets some things right. A lot of things, to be fair. But after the disastrous ruling of successive kings, Carthage would be transformed into an oligarchic republic, ruled by two supreme magistrates, known as suffets. These were elected by a senate. Now this body was a main governmental body made up of about 200 to 300 persons of influence, either people from nobility or very wealthy traders. And finally, we would have a popular assembly, would be chosen by the people of the city. These three bodies were meant to both enable each other when the time was right and to keep each other in check when needed. But this was just for the city of Carthage, and the territory that it directly controlled, which was rather small when you compare to the total size of the empire. Basically, Carthage controlled this chunk of North Africa here. Everything else was pretty much controlled by a system of vassal allies. Basically, Carthage would make you sign a contract, which can be summed up into 3 main points. 1. Tribute. You have to give Carthage money. Now this could be money in the terms of actual lump sum, trade goods, or just trading concessions, such as restrictive tariffs, as well as favorable bonuses for Carthaginian traders. 2. Diplomatic concessions. Basically, whatever Carthage did in terms of its policy, you would follow suit. I.e., you do not declare war on an ally of Carthage, you do not impede Carthage's trade lanes, and you don't set up blockades or sanctions that affect Carthage. Basically, whatever Carthage did, you followed suit. Third, and the most important, we have wartime aid. This would be usually in the form of supplies, material, money, or usually soldiers. Especially as we get on and on into the later parts of Carthage's history, they rely more and more upon allied soldiers and mercenaries. As for the rest, it was up to the individual city or polity, they could do whatever they want. So long as these 3 stipulations were met, Carthage didn't care what you did. But if you faltered on any of them, Carthage was not afraid to flex his muscles. As again, the Carthaginian navy was the best of the time, and would continue to be the best until the Romans defeated them in the Punic Wars. So, we can sum it up into the following points. 1. It was once a monarchy, but due to disasters it evolved into an oligarchy. 2. It ruled its empire like a businessman, via deals and monies, but if you defaulted, they would come collecting, usually with a couple quinquerim and marines on board. 3rd and finally, trade was the main concern for Carthage. So long as you did not affect that, Carthage did not care. So, it is important to note that when doing this, we are translating this into 40k, it's not going to be a one-to-one translation. There are some points and some things that I'm going to elect to change, so that 1, it will better fit into 40k, or I think it will just make a better governmental power. Because again, I'm not going to go through all the trouble of having this thing exist in Warhammer 40k, only for the Imperium to come and steamroll it. Because that's not fun. I plan on these guys existing and thriving, so I am trying to make them a very compelling story, but not exactly one-to-one fall or terribly grimdark either. Trying to strike a nice balance. So, to translate these 3 aspects into our 40k thing, they're going to be ruled by a rogue trader dynasty, but in conjunction with several planets as well as a system of senates. Sort of a constitutional monarchy type thing. Again, more closely mirroring that of Britain in the 19th century. Second, it's going to take after the Imperium in terms of rule. The Imperium, like Carthage, is actually pretty decentralized. The Imperium doesn't care so long as the tithe is given. As long as the tithe is given and you don't fall to chaos or do anything the Imperium doesn't like, you're allowed to do whatever the hell you want. This is a direct one-to-one to Carthage, which is pretty neat for us. And finally, unlike the Imperium, Xenos are going to be welcome and accepted, meaning that trade with every single entity is absolutely allowed and is actually promoted, with the only exception being chaos. Anything chaos, these guys are going to destroy instantly, because chaos bad. So again, looking into the government of Carthage, we can see that it is a very unique thing, and it's actually rather similar to the Romans. It started out as a monarchy, but the monarchy kind of went to shit, so they ditched the monarchy and made a type of republic instead. The only difference being is that whereas Nome relied on the patrician class, the noble class, Carthage relied on its businessmen, and ultimately that would become its downfall, as the Carthaginians were more concerned with the profit margin rather than the welfare of the state, something which the Romans didn't really have. Again, it's very interesting to take a look at these two. Both of them were ruled by 2 major polities, they both had a senate, they both had a popular assembly. It's really odd when you look at it. In many cases, Carthage and Rome were more alike than they should have been. And if you guys are familiar with the First Punic War, you'll know that them two coming to blows was actually by accident. Bloody Mamertines. But speaking of war, let's talk about their military. Carthage's military started out like all city-states of antiquity. It operated a semi-professional force of citizen soldiers, and quite surprising to casual historians, according to ancient sources, Carthage followed the Roman method, in where they would raise a citizen army and then add the same amount of allies/mercenaries. And Carthage would continue to make war like that for some time, until, however, the disastrous Battle of Himera during the First Punic Sicilian War, in which Carthage would raise a massive army of Carthaginians to conquer the island of Sicily. You see, what happened during the Battle of Himera? You see, what happened during the Battle of Syracuse is that the Greek colonists of the island of Sicily then band together into one united front, and were then moved to oppose the Carthaginian force. They had landed nearby a Sicilian city and then began to siege it. However, when the relief force came to fight, the Carthaginians then met them in an open field. And the Carthaginians were winning. They were significantly more trained and, generally speaking, outnumbered them. However, there was an issue. That being that Sicilians were able to disguise themselves as Carthaginian light cavalry and managed to get into the main base of the Carthaginians. From there, they would then light set base on fire, completely destroying most of their ships as well as any reinforcements. However, the Carthaginians would still be able to fight off the opponents, until, however, the garrison of the city they were besieging sallied out. From there, the Carthaginians would then flee in individual pockets and establish themselves on a hill, trying to fight off the opposing Sicilians, but they had no water, so about after a day or two's worth of fighting, they had to surrender. The Sicilians, however, gave them pretty simple terms. Just pack up and leave whatever booty you took. The Carthaginians readily accepted, and about half the army was said to have left and departed Sicily back to North Africa. But during that time, a massive storm appeared and absolutely destroyed the Carthaginian navy down to a single ship, meaning that the majority of that massive army, most of whom were Carthaginian citizens, were killed. This was so disastrous to the Carthaginian psyche that forever Carthage would change how it operated. Only the core of the army, that being about 2,000 to 3,000, a couple thousand men, would be known as the Sacred Band, that being professional heavy infantry clad in heavy hoplite armor, as well as all the officer corps would be Carthaginian. The rest would be allies and mercenaries. Hence how we get to the modern and the most famous Carthaginian mercenary army. It's noted that the Sacred Band is a hoplite force, as I said, heavy hoplites to be specific, but they have Afro-Persian trappings and traditions, including their weapons and armament and decorations. It was a very, very unique entity to say the least. Not to mention, the more wealthiers had a cavalry force, in addition to mighty war elephants, which were kind of the trump card of Carthage at the time. Now, whilst Carthage would take any and all mercenaries, there were a couple that made continuous appearances in their ranks, such as Greek and Iberian heavy infantry, Gallic, Germanic, and Greek heavy cavalry. Greek heavy cavalry in particular for their cataphracts were very prized. Iberian and Libyan light infantry, Numidian light cavalry, which was the most poignant, the most perfect, and the most well-loved ally/mercenary of the whole Carthaginian state. And finally, rounding it off with Cretan archers and Balearic slingers for their ranged contingent. It is important to note, however, that the Carthaginian Senate exerted incredibly strong oversight over the military factors. In fact, this was actually a factor that led to the defeat of Carthage in the First Punic War. You see, after a campaign had concluded, the general in question was subject to a review by the entirety of the Senate. If the Zenit had deemed that he had misused funds, abused his power, or generally speaking acted inappropriately, they would punish him, the most common form being crucifixion. Yes, that crucifixion. Meaning that yes, while you could win lots of glory in a war, if you fucked up, which was a lot easier to do than succeed, the Senate could outright declare you a failure and kill you via one of the worst ways imaginable in human society. This, in stark contrast to Roman generals who were encouraged to be military aggressive and fight, meant that with the Carthaginian generals, most of them were generally speaking timid and always picked the cautious option. This then led the Roman generals to be able to navigate and decide and decipher what they could do. It's only when we get to a general like Hannibal Barca, for example, who completely ignored the Senate and used his own influence and didn't really care what the Senate would do. He was going to do what he believed would win the war, and we see his success. But ultimately he would also befall by the Senate's nonsense. So, overall, we can sum up the Carthaginian military in these three factors. 1. It was a normal military, for the time that is, but after a disastrous calamity, it would then transform into a mercenary force. Again, that cultural impact of losing so many young men completely changed Carthage's outlook on it. And again, they were a mercantile trading empire first and foremost, and as we can see with our own modern world, said empires don't really like losing a lot of men. So, they transformed to a mercenary/ally force. Number 2, it had a wide array of units, and they chose the best of the best for each role. Again, as I said, Balearic slingers and Cretan archers were the best ranged units that you could get. Iberian and Libyan light infantry were some of the best that you could get. The Greek heavy cataphracts were without a doubt the greatest cavalry in the known world at the time. Instead of trying to create their own units, the Carthaginians just paid the best of the best to fight for them, and it worked for quite some time. So, how would we translate that into Warhammer 40k? First off, our polity would raise many guard regiments, but after a disaster it would be transformed into elite but small units. It would also rely on its Space Marine chapter, leaving everything else to mercenaries. Yes, they have a Space Marine chapter because why? Fuck you, I want a Space Marine chapter, that's why. Secondly, all Xenos are welcome, but no chaos. Again, just like they're trading, Xenos mercenaries are very plentiful in the Imperium as well as normal human mercenaries. Our polity, much like Carthage, is going to accept anyone and everything so long as you're not chaos, and it can do that because, as we mentioned, it's a rogue trader state. Hence it has the warrant of trade, which means that the Imperium can't exactly shove its nose in its business without incurring some type of loss. And then finally, and our first major contradiction, we're going to have it be that the military will be under the purview of the Astartes and not the Senate. It makes sense, not only from a practical standpoint, in that, hey, having the government exert such a strong influence that every general is on the pain of death for anything, not to mention that that pain of death will often be used for political enemies. You're not exactly going to have a general operating to win the war, more likely to save his own skin. But in 40k, if you have Astartes who are genetically bred for war, just put them in charge of the military. They'll do better than you will. So this is the first major change that we're doing, and it's a change that I believe makes sense, especially in the context of 40k, because when Astartes are around, you usually give them the big guns, because they can carry the big guns. But overall, looking at the military of Carthage, it's something that again makes a lot of sense, and we can draw a lot of parallels to our own world. But whereas in a normal case, a modern military would double down and further increase its military to recover, Carthage simply hired out the services. Ironically, it would be the Romans themselves who would take a page out of this, specifically under the Byzantines who would be known for hiring mercenaries. But looking at it and translating it into 40k, it's pretty easy to translate again, except for that last point that we talked about. Because again, I want this to be a functioning state that can work, meaning that a lot of the problems that Carthage have, I'm trying to iron out here and there. I'm not going to completely remove them because I don't want to Mary Sueify my faction, but in the same vein, I want it so that it can actually thrive, not just survive. And for a civilization to survive, its culture must thrive. Speaking of culture, now we get to my favorite part about the civilization, the culture. And the culture of Carthage was actually something else. The Carthaginians originated from the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were a mixture of ancient Greek or Hellenic people combined with the ancient Middle Eastern traditions as well. They formed a hybrid culture of themselves. So you have that initial base, which is already hybrid culture. You then combine the North African trappings of the intermingling that happened in those unique colonies. Because again, the cultural as well as noble ties as well as societal norms were close to the Phoenicians, but they weren't exactly one for one, meaning that new hybrids then evolved. Not to mention, the Greeks were incredibly close to the Carthaginians. Again, both of them were relatively naval powers in terms of Athens, and also trade powers. The island of Sicily in of itself was known for the longest time to be split down the middle, half Greek, half Carthaginian. Not to mention, they already had that ancestry of Hellenism, and when your neighbors are also Hellenic, that just further compounds itself. And you take a look at the traditional trappings of a hoplite of Carthage. Yes, you have this Carthaginian hoplite, clad in heavy hoplite armor, but in the same vein, he has African tribal tattoos and inscribings. He wears African clothing and pelts, but in the same vein, his hair, as well as the way his jewelry is worn, everything about it screams Middle Eastern Persian trappings. You have this blend of cultures that creates something wholly unique. Also, it's said that the food of Carthage as well is something completely different. One example that we have is the type of Carthaginian breakfast, which main ingredients is a type of cream or ricotta cheese, oats, milk, and honey. Essentially, it's cheesecake oats for breakfast. Which itself is just wild when you think about it, that something that was so palatable to our modern sensibilities was alive and well several thousand years ago. The food of Carthage as in of itself was a mixture of African grains as well as Middle Eastern spices, but also Greek style of cooking. It's something that is so incredibly lovely and beautiful and amazing. And for those of you who know, I love me my Rome, but in the same vein, I also despise Rome for many great things. One thing that the Romans were really good at was erasing cultures. The culture of Carthage was pretty much erased wholly and utterly. All of the pseudo-Hellenic things the Romans took over and adopted, but Carthage was so wholly, utterly, and destroyed that its culture didn't really exist anymore. It's kind of like the Gauls. They existed, yes, but by the time that we actually started getting concrete writings about them, they were Romanized. And it is a terrible, terrible, terrible shame, because Carthage was a cosmopolitan metropolis. It existed everywhere. You had traders coming in and out, various different peoples, and that's the thing about Carthage. It didn't dominate the culture, because its culture itself was a hybrid, so it welcomed hybridizations. If you had money, Carthage welcomed you openly. If you were a trader, Carthage welcomed you openly. Carthage did not care what you did so long as you didn't interfere with the bottom dollar. In fact, it led to this major cosmopolitan area, this blending of culture upon culture upon culture, and that's the thing. We know for a fact that it had Hellenic, African, as well as Persian influences. But it could have had more. We don't really know. Who's to say that these own individual Phoenician colonies had their own unique cultures to them and Carthage would have blended that together? Just thinking about everything that we could learn from a modern Carthage, if it still existed, the culture it would have would be such a unique blend. And it truly is a great tragedy that we don't know truly what Carthaginian culture is. We have the Romanicized version of what the Romans said, but you always have to take that with a grain of salt. So, we can sum up the culture into two favorite parts. One, Carthaginian culture itself was a mixture of Hellenic, North African, and Phoenician, as well as pretty much anything the Carthaginians liked. They weren't exactly picky on hegemony. Their hegemony came by the sea and by the money. Everything else didn't really matter. Number two, Carthage did not dominate the culture, nor did it try to be. It welcomed all people so long as they did not affect the bottom dollar. Again, Carthage didn't care. They'd welcome anyone and everything so long as the actual monetary value was not affected, something which they heavily differed from Rome. So, how are we going to transfer this into our 40k setting? Number one, our 40k Carthage would be a mixture of Imperial, Xeno, and its initial polity. Its initial polity already diverging from Imperial. Number two, our polity is not going to care about Xenos or Imperium or anything. It's going to be a blended mixture of all of them, but in the same vein, so long as you're not chaos, it welcomes you openly. Meaning we basically have a blank canvas on how we want to handle this culture. And it be very much of the Carthaginian culture. Blending of Hellenic, Imperial, North African, we could say that could be Xeno. Let's say that a Xeno's race, which is loosely based off North African culture at the time, has a great impact on the polity. And then finally, its own initial polity, that would be descended from a pseudo-Persian, Tyrian, Phoenician vibe to it. All in all, I just think that the idea of Carthage's culture in 40k would just be perfect. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is all of the various factors that we've covered. We've covered all the categories. We have every single thing that we need to make our 40k Carthage. So what I've done is I've thrown all of these together and I've built up our own unique Carthage in Warhammer 40k. So ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Rogue Trader realm that is known as the Volantian Empire. The Rogue Trader realm, known as the Volantian Empire, is one of the most successful and wealthy realms within the Imperium of Man. Yet this mighty and vaunted realm came from humble beginnings, and was not destined for greatness. Yet destiny has a mind of her own, and the tale of Volantia will be one of trial, disaster, and ultimately, triumph. The origins of Volantia begin with the Principality of Pomis. This old and venerable state was made up of many systems joined together under treaties of trade and defense. It would be brought into the greater fold of humanity under the Great Crusade, as the merchant princes deemed it more profitable to submit than to fight. They would embrace the imperial truth, although the imperial's anti-Xenos policy did reduce trade, which caused crumblings in many planets within the principalities. But they acquiesced to the demands of the Imperium. Despite this, the principality would flourish, and even see it garrisoned by a company of the 7th Legion, the Imperial Fists, a great honor which the principality took pride in. Yet as with all things within the Imperium, with the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, the principality would suffer. As well not the site of a major campaign, Loyalist forces led by Imperial Fists would battle bitterly with the traitor force led by Iron Warriors for control over the worlds. Although the conflict was short, it was very bloody, with the principality suffering under the yoke of both parties. Yet in the end, the Iron Warriors would be driven off, and the Imperials would gather what loyalist elements they could and head to the Siege of Terra, leaving the principality to self-govern. Some years later, the principality had recovered much of its lost strength. An envoy from the Imperium arrived, and demanded the continued fealty of the principality, which the principality would give, mostly in name however, as aside from the imperial tithe, the principality was largely independent of the Imperium, which the Imperium was fine with, but even here, the wily merchant princes struck a deal. Instead of paying an annual amount, they would offer the Imperium trade discounts, which would equal the same amount to the imperial tithe. The Imperium, either not willing nor caring to press the matter further, agreed to this. But the cunning merchant princes would use this as a free hand to skimp out of the trade deals. So while on paper the tithe was given, in reality the principality barely gave anything at all, yet this choice would ultimately prove to be the undoing of the principality. During this long absence, the principality would found many new trade colonies far past imperial space. Many of them would grow powerful and wealthy, such as Nova Utica, Cadiza Villa, and Bordalonica. Yet it would be the newest of these that would prove to be the most important, that being the youngest daughter of Pomis, Volantia, or the New World, in the Poman dialect of High Gothic. How fitting it is then that the youngest daughter of Pomis would be founded by the youngest daughter of a noble house, as Alyssa Diodokai was born the last child of the merchant prince of Tremus. Being heiress to the most prominent planet in the principality should have meant a life of privilege and comfort for Alyssa. Yet, not so, as court intrigue and political machinations would see her father assassinated by none other than her cousin, Melkor, who sought to take her as a bride, to confirm his position of power and legitimize his authority. Yet Alyssa would not simply comply with Melkor. She gathered all those who were opposed to Melkor and his tyrannical rule, and using her father's mass fortune, which she tricked Melkor into believing she had destroyed, gathered a small fleet of ships and departed the principality. From there she would travel to the northern fringes of known space, and settle on a world rich in both resources and placed right at the heart of a vital trade lane. It would be here that she and her people would found a new city, known as Volantia. For she and her people had just stepped forth into a new world, both literally and figuratively. Oh, little did they know how right they were. While Volantia was beginning to thrive, the principality was about to enter a steep decline, as while it had increased freedoms with the absence of the Imperium, it also had decreased security over the following years. Thus, in the subsequent decades that would pass, the principality would be subject to countless raids and invasion by the Orcs, Tyranids, and Chaos, with the principality surviving each raid, yet always at a cost. Over the years, the principality weakened, and the trade colonies it had established stopped paying their tributes to the mother city. This only further hastened the decline of the principality, yet the final blow would come with the birth of the Citridix Maledictum. But while the principality was not invaded by chaotic forces, hope suffered greatly as it was in the light off of the Imperium. With this event and the return of the avenging son, Robude Gilliman, the wider Imperium would take notice of the principality, and they would look into their lost brethren. This would culminate in a crusade fleet reaching Pomis space, and informing the principality that they were behind on over 10,000 years worth of tide, and that the Imperium would be governing them with a stronger hand. Not to mention, they would also have to give over one of their worlds to a new Primaris chapter, for them to use as their own fief world. For these space marines would now protect the principality from both within and without. As you can imagine, these demands were too much to bear for the proud merchant princes, and so they declared open revolt against the Imperium. Said revolt, however, was rather short-lived, as while the principality had a formidable navy, their ground forces were lacking, even more so against space marines. Thus, the Imperial Guards steamrolled through the planet after planet after planet, as the Sacred Brotherhood chapter of Space Marines were in fact descended from the Imperial Fists, and thus had inherited their predecessors' talent for naval combat and boarding actions. Combine this with their fleet being reinforced by the Imperial Navy, and the Principality was easily bested. Its merchant princes were executed, and loyal Imperial governors were put in their place, with the Principality being all but destroyed, and reorganized into the latest Imperial province, now known as Satrapium. Yet this was not the end, but only the beginning, as the Crusade fleet had orders to pacify this sector and establish total Imperial rule. And there was little to no resistance to the Imperial Juggernaut until they reached the area beyond Imperial space. Here the Imperials expected to find many desperate colonies on the verge of death and being abandoned by their mother world. Yet what they found shocked even the warriors of the mighty Astartes, for they found a realm flourishing, as rich as the core worlds of humanity, peaceful and bountiful. And it was then that they were greeted by a massive fleet that matched their own. Yet the greeting that reached their ears was not one that they expected.
Welcome, fellow servants of the Imperium. Her Grace, the Lady Captain, Alyssa the 23rd, Sophatus, rogue trader of the Volantian Empire, welcomes you with open arms and invites you to stay as long as you wish.
To say that the Crusade fleet was shocked would be an understatement, for it turns out that somehow Alyssa I had secured a warrant of trade. The exact story is unknown to us, but it is said that she was able to take it from a failing and bankrupt rogue trader house, via her cunning, beauty, and her massive wealth. Regardless of how it was acquired, when the Administratum Adepts attached to the Crusade examined it, they found nothing wrong, nothing illegal, and nothing out of place. The Crusade was even more surprised when the Suffetist ordered them supplies and allowed them to use their naval stations as resupply and repair points, free of charge. All of this newfound aid and the sheer mystery of it all moved the Sacred Brotherhood chapter to request that they settle in Volantia rather than the new satrapium. The Space Marines and Crusade officials suspected that this act would finally cause the Suffetess to show her true hand. Yet, she readily agreed. With the Space Marines growing tired of this political game of cat and mouse, Chapter Master Hannibal, the Thunderbolt, asked the Suffetess plainly as to what game she was playing. The Suffetess, for her part, replied in the same simple manner. She was not playing any game. She, via the warrant of trade, has the right to do what she wishes, and has not broken the contract. And she would rather have the Imperium as an ally and a trade partner, rather than a reluctant warden. This was enough to calm the suspicions for the time being, and the Sacred Brotherhood would settle on the world of Iberikar, and over the course of the 200 years of the Indomitus Crusade, the Sacred Brotherhood would grow to form a close bond, so much so that they were deemed protectors of the realm, and had become synonymous with the Carvalantian Empire as a whole, so much so that they are often referred to as one and the same, and thus, the Carvalantian Empire, under its beautiful and cunning Suffetess, has only grown and prospered under the era Indomitus. Yet, for how long shall this last? For even now, new powers arise, and old foes eye the wealthy Imperium with greedy ambition. Yet, they will find no easy plunder here, but rather a wall of iron in the form of mighty fleets, backed by a few but elite guard regiments, supplemented by powerful mercenaries, and led by the Emperor's very own Angels of Death, allied to the Lady Captain of Carvalantia. For whilst this is the old galaxy, this is the new world, and that means new rules. The government of Carvalantia can be divided into 3 distinct branches. The Rogue Trader dynasty, known as the Suffet or Suffetess, led by the successor of Alyssa I, currently Alyssa XXIII. The Senatorum Volantia, made up of 1 senator from each of the planets under the Carvalantian Empire. And finally, the Assembly of Man, a governmental body made up of elective officials from all across the Empire, the majority being businessmen and popular figureheads amongst the common people. All 3 of these branches work together to further the goals of the Empire. The Suffetess, together with the Senate, will decide on the foreign policy of the realm. Yet, it is important to note that while the Senate has power over its individual worlds, it is the Suffetess who is commander-in-chief and thus has control over the military, and most importantly, the Navy, with the Space Marines only willing to hear her counsel. This means that both parties must work together, else the whole realm will suffer. Yet, this is not an issue, as the Suffetess does not care what the individual governors do, so long as they do not enter the worship of chaos, go against the Imperium, fall into tyranny, stand against her or the realm, and most importantly, do not disturb the flow of trade. So long as these few rules are followed, there shall be no issue. Yet for domestic matters, we must look to the Assembly of Man. Here many representatives will gather and push for matters and policies that will benefit the common man. And here again, there is a balancing act at work. The Suffetess will agree to most of the Assembly's wishes, so long as the major rules are not broken. This then puts pressure on the Senate, who would be less than willing to listen to the common man. But, at the end of the day, this is a Rogue Trader dynasty, and despite what it may seem like, Carvalantia has been one of the most stable and prosperous realms within the Imperium, with it never having a dynastic civil war, and the peoples of its realm know this fact, and they both love and thank their Suffetess for watching over them. And to her credit, she has always put her people first, unless it goes against business, then like all things in Carvalantia, it's just another deal to make sure that the scales measure equal. Without a doubt, the greatest strength of the Carvalantian Empire is its gargantuan economy. The sheer wealth that floods the Empire means that even the lowliest worker lives significantly better than most within the borders of the Imperium. Many Imperial scholars have suggested that this bountiful plenty is what has led to Carvalantian's relative stability. Others will point to the sheer freedom with which her citizens live with. In truth, it is a mixture of both. The freedom allows wealth to be gained, and the wealth allows for freedom to remain. The Carvalantian Empire operates on a system of free trade with an open market. Its small business owners are championed and supported, not by the state, but by larger businesses. Monopolies within the Empire are strictly prohibited on pain of death, for the ethos crafted by Alyssa I was one of the Empire thriving as a whole, or, in her own words, "We cannot have any monopolies within our Empire, for we will be the greatest monopoly within the Imperium as a whole. That is how we shall thrive." And thus it has been, with the majority of the economy being mining and extraction companies, the largest possible within the Empire gathering resources from the rich, albeit dangerous, moons and asteroids. The multitude of small business artisans crafting everything and anything, from fine liquors and luxurious ornaments to simple hadsman's tools and last packs. These are then transported via trade, with many traders' guilds operating within and without the Imperium's space. All of this is possible, as when the old Principality of Palmus was declining, it would abandon many of its colonies and trade lanes, which Volantia would then absorb via treaty and protect them via its mighty navy, leading to many calling Volantia the successor to the old Principality. Yet with none of its downsides, or at least none that can be seen, this economic might, bountiful plenty, and entrepreneurial mindset has led to a popular saying within the Imperium regarding Volantia as a whole.
If it exists, they make it in Volantia. And if it doesn't, they'll make it for you, for the right price.
Volantian's military can be divided into 5 main branches: the Volantian Navy, the Volantian Void Hoplites, and the Mercenary Command Bureau. All 3 are under the direct purview of the Suffetus. The PDF, Planetary Defense Forces, which are under the purview of individual planetary governors, and the independent command of the Adeptus Astartes chapter, known as the Sacred Brotherhood, led by Chapter Master Hannibal, the Thunderbolt. Each of these branches have their own storied history to them. The Astartes are the simplest to cover. The Sacred Brotherhood traces their lineage to the Ultima founding, and are a majority of a Primaris Space Marine chapter. Yet, interesting and unique among their kind is that they also possess a contingent of Firstborn Marines, the remnants of another Space Marine chapter, known as the Sacred Phoenicians. After being savaged by the horrors of the Citadix Maledictum, the Crusading chapter was seemingly on the verge of extinction, until the Primaris chapter known as the Hallowed Brotherhood, together with the Crusade fleet, interceded on their behalf, saving the Firstborn chapter, yet the Primaris themselves taking noticeable losses in the action. After this great act, and seeing the state of their chapter and the Imperium as a whole, the Firstborn decided to join forces with the Primaris, and found a new chapter. The Primaris readily agreed, and the 2 chapters were joined, thus forming the Sacred Brotherhood. The fact that the 2 chapters were both descended from the Imperial Fist, and the fact that their kinship was sealed in the blood of combat, meant that the merging went rather smoothly, with the Firstborn bringing invaluable experience and a massive and ancient fleet, in combination with the Primaris bringing new technology and much-needed resources. The Sacred Brotherhood holds their lineage in great esteem, as they have inherited the naval traditions of the Fist, specializing in ship-to-ship warfare, possessing a large and powerful fleet, with masterfully trained crews, being experts in planetary assault, and the tactic they are most known for, boarding actions, as they had taken up the mantle of the breaches of the old legions, with each of their brothers being armed with a Mark III Warder pattern boarding shield, multi-charges, a bolt rifle, grenades, and a chainsword, with their first company known as the Hallowed Phoenicians, in honor of their previous chapters, being known for their large formations of Terminator, Aggressors, and Centurions, with a personal guard of the Chapter Master, donning the greatest relic of the chapter, 6 suits of ancient Cataphracti pattern Terminator armor, said to have been passed down to the chapter since its founding. The chapter master of the Sacred Brotherhood is Hannibal, known as the Thunderbolt, as he often leads planetary assaults and shipboarding actions personally, said to be the first one into the breach, leading his Cataphracti veteran bodyguard via a ancient Cestus assault ram, with which the Primaris Marines had found on their journey, and thanks to the skills of the Firstborn Tech Marines, it was able to be restored to operation. Being rather large in size and ferocious in combat, Hannibal cuts quite the intimidating image. So much so that when the Sacred Brotherhood was assisting an Imperial world against a minor Orc warband, Hannibal would engage the war boss in would-be combat and effortlessly cut down the would-be tyrant. After seeing such a sight, the Imperial governor watching the event would remark, "By the throne, it's like he's a thunderbolt thrown by the Emperor himself." And ever since that day, he has been known as the Thunderbolt. Yet, he has guarded himself another title, the Warden of Volantia. To those outside the Empire, it's a quip on how the Space Marines watches over the ambitious rogue trader realm. Yet to those within, and to the Space Marines themselves, it is a promise that any who wish to harm this realm must first pass the Warden of Thunder and his sacred warders, for they are those that guard the seas of this prosperous realm. While the Space Marines are the greatest asset of the Empire, a very close second is the Volantian Navy, divided into 8 major fleets, 1 for each of the 5 main provinces of the Empire, 2 rapid response roaming fleets, and the Royal Fleet, which includes the personal fleet of the Volantian system and the Sacred Brotherhood's fleet in of itself. Though it must be said that the Space Marines are under the command of Hannibal alone, though the Astartes have a close and friendly working relationship with the Empire, as the Empire respects their independence, and the Astartes respect the professionalism and effectiveness of the Empire and its people, in conjunction with both parties expressing gratitude for the relationship they have, as both receive the things that they need. Each fleet is led by an Adherbal, or Admiral, the Royal Fleet being led by the Vasilikos Atrabas, or the Royal Admiral, in charge of the whole Carvalantian Navy on behalf of the Suffragists. The disposition of the Navy is as follows. 30% are made up of escort classes, such as Sword-class frigates and Dauntless-class light cruisers. 20% are capital ships, the Avenger-class Grand Cruiser and the Mars-class battle cruiser being the two most notable, though they do possess a number of Emperor-class battleships, prized for their ability to carry strike craft, which the vaunted ranks of the Aeronautica Volantia use to guard these hallowed beasts. The Aeronautica Volantia being the air wing of the Empire, which is under the purview of the Navy, and is also known for its deadly fighter races, while the lion's share of the Navy, that being 50%, are heavy cruisers, known as quad cruisers, a Carvalantian native design. They are named for the dual quad banks of main engines, but cruisers of Imperial design, such as the Mars and Luna class, are also present. Each planet of the Empire will also have its own planetary fleet, but these are usually smaller gunboats and corvettes, geared towards anti-pirate duties, which are under the purview of the PDF, though they can be requisitioned if the need is dire. Speaking of the PDF, each planet in the Empire has its own planetary defense force, which is used to keep the peace within the planet and defend its foes from without. These forces, however, are not regulated and vary greatly, and, as mentioned earlier, they can be requested by the Empire for military matters. We then come to the final branch, the Carvalantian Void Hoplites and the Mercenary Command Bureau, and their story begins at one of the most disastrous defeats of the Empire, the War for the Sicilian Reach. The Sicilian Reach is a prosperous area of space, located smack middle of the trade lanes of the outer Imperial space, making it a prime location for trade, and this drew the attention of the Empire, which wanted to secure the whole Reach for themselves. Yet the Reach was occupied by former Imperial colonists, which, having been abandoned during the heresy, were now an independent power, known as the Seranthinese Protectorate. Negotiations would fail terribly, which would then lead to the spark of a deadly war, known as the First Cyrenisi-Volantian War. This war would see the worst disaster of the Empire's history, the slaughter of Periminus. For Volantia under Suffolk Malinor III would double the already large standing army of the Empire, known as the Carvalantian Guard, and gather the bulk of them and the navy to send them on an expedition to conquer the important trade world of Permenius, which would serve as a springboard for further invasions. A collaboration of the various states of the Sertanese Protectorate would oppose them, and the battle would begin. The Empire would soon gain an upper hand due to their superior equipment and numbers, and it looked like the Volantian juggernaut would prove victorious. Yet, that's when the Seranthinese unleashed their trap, as they had used previously unknown cloaking technology, as well as captured Volantian ships in uniforms to board Volantian ships and enter the Volantian camp. Upon receiving the signal, the saboteurs would detonate the ammo depots of many ships and the camp, causing mass confusion and cutting off the army from the navy, and ultimately destroying the camp totally. Yet the Volantians would not yield, and formed a defense on a series of hills. Yet when the enemy garrison would strike their rear, any chance of victory was lost. They managed to hold out for 3 weeks, and having their supplies exhausted after only 5 days, they would surrender and sue for peace. The Seranthinese terms were quite lenient, as the Volantians had to leave any damaged equipment and ships and depart the Seranthinese space and promised never to return. Having no other option, they agreed and departed the system. The expedition force was said to have lost over half its strength. Yet, that was not the end of the disaster. For on the journey back, a vicious warp storm, seemingly sent by the gods themselves to punish the arrogant Volantians, would destroy most of the surviving fleet of the original expedition. Only 7% would make it back to Carvalantia itself. Such a disaster sent shockwaves throughout the Empire, as many of those sent had been citizens of Carvalantia and her most loyal systems. Many houses lost heirs, and many great merchant businesses were left abandoned with no one to run them. It was only by the quick thinking of Malinor that he was able to quell the unrest before it could spark and light the fires of rebellion. He would disband the Carvalantian Guard, taking the remains of the expedition and what remained of the army, and reform them into the Carvalantian Void Hoplites, based on the venerated solar auxilia of old, as Volantia had discovered a cache of auxilia equipment on one of their worlds. Yet, while attempts to reverse engineer the tech proved incredibly difficult, the Empire was able to gain new technology, and was able to create the Volantian pattern Void Armor. Whilst technically not true Void Armor, it blends the environmental protective body glove suit of the auxilia with the reinforced hardened plate of carapace armor to make a unique and potent set of armor. They are armed with the Hegatsis pattern Lasbuster, a powerful, if temperamental weapon, a modified version of the ubiquitous Hellgun. The Archmagos of the ForgeWorld of Agaxis will take the durability of the Auxilia Las rifle and the hitting power of the Hellgun and blend the two. The result is a durable and hard-hitting weapon with the ability to be overcharged, resulting in a devastating bolt that can even threaten power armor. Yet, like the plasma gun, this does give way to the possibility of the weapons exploding, severely wounding the hoplite, ruining both the expensive armor and the weapon, meaning that this is only used when facing opponents that are deemed worthy of it. These warriors are carried into battle by advanced void-sealed and up-armored chimeras, Leman Russes, and Tremenes heavy assault transports of Volantia native design. They're supported by their own fleet and air wings. While deadly and effective, the sheer cost of producing and maintaining these units is massive, even for the wealthy empire. Not to mention that their selection process and training means that only the very best of the best may don the panoply of a hoplite. All these factors combined mean that only 7 cohorts of 30,000 men each exists at a given time, with each cohort possessing its own fleet and air wing. Yet to supplement these hoplites as well as the Astartes, the Empire created the Mercenary Command Bureau, which is in charge of recruiting mercenary forces to handle the majority of the groundwork. These range from every kind of Xenos to Imperials and even the Sithonese themselves, with the only exception being that anything Chaos is to be shot on sight. These changes and promises made to the Empire that no son or daughter of Volantia would ever be killed again on such a scale would soothe the population and would lay the groundwork for Malino's son, Balithonor, to conquer Parmenios and half of the Sicilian Reach, settling the war with a treaty with the Empire and Sertines sharing the Reach, and the Sertines offering their warriors as mercenaries to the Volantians. And the treaty, albeit at times shaky, has still held over all these years. The military of the Carvalantian Empire is a mercenary host, made up of the best in each respective role. Yet they are kept in check by a core of loyal elites, allied forces, and of course, the Space Marines. Yet before any of these raise their blades, the enemy must first breach the implacable wall that is the mighty Volantian Navy, which has never been an easy task. All these factors combined make the Empire a truly formidable opponent. Some say even for the mighty Imperium itself. And finally, we have the culture of the Empire. The culture of the Carvalantian Empire has developed over the course of several thousand years, and has evolved into a mixture of Imperial, native Pomin, and Xenos. And this is represented in every aspect of the civilization, with the Empire being a melting pot of cultures, races, and everything in between. This is due to 2 reasons. The first being that since Carvalantia is a rogue trader realm, it means that the Imperium cannot exert any noticeable control over the Empire. Yet this fact is further doubled, as since the Empire is on the very edge of Imperial space, means that it is independent in all but name, though they still continuously pay the Imperial tithe in full and sometimes extra, but they have learned the lesson of Old Promise. All of this combined means that all the restrictive and suppressive laws of the Imperium do not factor here. The second reason is that with the nature of the Empire being a trade power and relying on mercenaries, means that all races of the galaxy see the Empire as a golden opportunity to thrive within its borders. This means that Carvalantian food has Imperial dishes flavored with Xenos spices. The no-nonsense brutalistic Imperial architecture is adorned and flourished with the lavish trappings of the Pomin culture, and Pomin villas are owned by Xenos residents, which have long been citizens of the Empire for generations. This unrestricted blending of culture has infiltrated every class of the Empire, from the Sophitis herself to even the mighty Astartes, bearing trappings and markings of the Empire's mixed heritage. With such an open acceptance of culture and the sheer wealth and decadence of the Empire, one may believe that it is a hotspot for chaos cults. Yet, not so. For the Empire employs its own secret police, known as the Dondarium de Tranta, or the Empress's Gaze. This force is not meant to persecute the Empire's people, however, but rather it is made up of select inquisitors and special covert Xenos agents, with the sole goal of rooting out chaos corruption. In a realm like the Empire, where the number one goal is to facilitate trade and business, the one rule is not to interfere with said business. But the Empress's Gaze are the one entity that has carte blanche to act however it feels is necessary, with them answering only to the Sophitis herself and the chapter master of the Sacred Brotherhood. This has largely rendered chaos, corruption null and void. Yet, this has come at a cost, as since the Empress Gaze only deals with matters regarding to chaos, any and all other issues of discontent and civil unrest are left to the court of the Sophitis herself, and with the sheer amount of leeway that planets of the Empire operate with, means that individual planetary rebellions are not uncommon. Though with the arrival of the Volantian fleet, or Emperor forbid the Space Marines, this usually removes any and all thoughts of rebellion instantly. As for the Carvolantian people themselves, they will always try to settle an issue via diplomatic means, as war is bad for business. Most of the time, when a grievance has been settled, Carvolantians will usually confirm the matter with a trade. The greater the trade, the happier the parties involved are. Yet, if no deal can be made, many businesses, especially the trade guilds, possess and maintain private security firms, which in some cases can be considered small armies, and the merchants of Carvolantia are not hesitant to use their more volatile assets. All in all, the people in the Empire are an eclectic mix, boasting a wide variety of people and cultures, yet all of them are welcoming. They are always eager to make a deal. They care not of anything else about you and will welcome you, so long as you don't mess with their business. And if you do, despite whatever grievances they may have with each other, they will swiftly unite and remind you that Carvolantia is a realm of trade, and they have a great deal of means to enforce that trade. Always. In the end, the Carvolantian Empire is a rogue trader realm, and it shows that. Similar to the Imperium, yet completely and utterly different. There are some in the Imperium who vaunt it as a championship of humanity, some who claim it is merely a diversion and perversion of the Emperor's will and deemed it to be destroyed. Yet regardless of whether you love or hate it or not, Carvolantia has existed for thousands of years, and will continue to exist for thousands more. With the strengthening of the Imperial ties, and now the introduction of a whole Space Marine chapter in its defense, it would seem that the vision of a list of the First and her people truly has indeed come true. For Carvolantia, like its name would suggest, truly is a new world. However, will this new world survive? Or will the horrors of the old galaxy come to claim it? Honestly, no one knows. But as all things in Carvolantia, if you want to take something from them, you better make sure to pay for it. Because if you don't, the Carvolantians will make sure that you pay for it one way or another. And in that case, I think that they're rather imperial, if you ask me. But yeah, hi, hey, how you doing? Hope you guys enjoyed that video. History Hammer, long video. It's been a while since I've done this because these videos take a long time to write and research and script and edit. This one took me like, 3 weeks to do all the things, and it's like, yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think. It's a different type of History Hammer video. We're having another History Hammer coming up next, which is going to be the Steel Legion and what they're actually based off of, but that's going to be a little bit later, maybe in like 2-3 weeks. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you guys like this series. I just want to hear you guys' thoughts. What do you guys think about the Carvolantian Empire? Do you guys think that it would make sense? Do you guys like to see this in 40k? Do you think it's too much? Do you think it's too little? And I just want to hear you guys' thoughts. But I want to say a massive thank you to you guys for watching, and even more massive thank you to my awesome members and Patreons. Big shout out to my Officer Corps with Mr. Eddie V3, Mr. Major of the Void, and Mr. General Alexander. Shout out to my Sergeant Tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, Mr. Corns Butcher, Mr. Bulwin, and Mr. Sean IRL 7. Big shout out to my Corporal Tier members, Tremail the Math Kitty, Mr. Lord Rosarius, and Mr. Tech Priest Toaster. And finally, but certainly not least, massive thank you to my privateer members, Mr. Thomas Moslons, Mr. Ivan_SBW, Mr. Hattori's Curse, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Michael Hayeda, Mr. Diego Castro, and Mr. Fortus Unum. Thank you sincerely, each and every one of you, from the bottom of my heart. The fact that you guys do this means that I don't mind taking a day off or two from actual daily content to make a video like this, even though this took like 3 weeks, but you know what I mean. Oh, it takes so long. But I owe this to all of you wonderful people. So thank you oh so very, very, very much. I love and appreciate each and every one of you. But if you want to join these awesome people, sign up with our memberships and Patreons today. You can early access videos, bunch of behind the scenes stuff, special polls and whatnot, and if anything happens here, you guys get first dibs into all of it, and you get some special behind the scenes stuff, Q&A, and everything in between, and most importantly, my love and support. But remember, this will always be free, and whether you give your boy $1 or not, I will love you just the same. Mwah! Yes, I will. So yeah, History Hammer is back. Let me know down below what you guys think about Carthage in 40k. Do you guys like the idea of Carvolantia? Do you think it's cringe? Do you think it's not cringe? Let me know all of this stuff down below. And let me know, what other things do you guys want to see for History Hammer coming back? But with all that, my voice is terribly tired. This whole recording has been bloody 2 hours long. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been General Rally 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Make sure to stay entrepreneurial out there, boys and gals. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss Rangers. wonder how many people will call me cringe for doing homebrew. Let's see.